We're going to move now to the next paper by Stephan Lewandowsky from University of Bristol. The paper is called Combating Knowledge Dementors, and I'll let you do the subtitle.
Expelliarmus or Expecto Patronum. Okay, well, when I received this invitation to come to the Vatican, which was just fantastic, I thought, oh, okay, Vatican, Latin. I'll have to put Latin into the title of my talk. Of course, it's not Latin, it is actually Harry Potter. And just in case you're not totally familiar with the latest in the Harry Potter world, the Dementors are people or creatures who are depriving human minds of intelligence. And I would argue that we're living in an age of post-truth Dementors. How did we get here? Well, I want to illustrate how we got here using American presidents because, you know, they're powerful. Everybody knows them. They're also widely scrutinized. And so we find out a lot about their challenges when they encounter reality and then lie about it. Now, if you look at this historical arc, one of the things you'll notice is, and this has been mentioned before, I think it was Marty who said that Donald Trump issued 21 false or misleading claims every day during his presidency, so about 1 hour. Apparently, he never slept. And so there's been this recent explosion of falsehoods from politicians. And of course, we're sitting here because we know all about that. But I think there's another way of characterizing that history, and that history and that analysis is to actually look at the type of dishonesty and the type of presumed intent underlying the dishonesty. Now, I would argue that up until about 10, 15 years ago, most of the falsehoods uttered by politicians were carefully curated. Richard Nixon was dishonest to avoid accountability for Watergate. Bill Clinton lied for obvious reasons. George Bush tried to get us to believe that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And in all those cases, the misinformation was designed to be believable and for us to believe it. Now, I would argue that during the last 10 years or so, there has been a shift to a different type of misinformation that is accompanied by epistemic insouciance. It just no longer matters whether anything is true or not. And the term shock and chaos is something that I borrow from McCright and Dunlap's analysis, who, like me, suggest that lies these days often have no apparent specific purpose. Donald Trump is lying about things that are completely irrelevant to his political welfare. And whenever you then challenge people and the people who issue those false statements and try to correct them, they're not debating typically whether something is true or false. They're just resorting to what I call ontological gerrymandering. They're just saying, oh, well, never mind you. We have alternative facts, or the truth isn't the truth. One man's fact is another man's lies. These are all sort of anecdotal statements by people who are engaging in the shock and chaos disinformation, which to my mind is qualitatively different from what we used to have, because we no longer have a contestation even for a shared reality. I mean, weapons of mass destruction were an exercise in realism because we were supposed to believe that they were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That's very different from making up alternative facts about attendance at an inaugural crowd. Now, what is remarkable, what we have to understand is that all these falsehoods by Donald Trump didn't seem to have an effect on his approval ratings. And in fact, within his own party, he never lost support at any time during his presidency. He never fell below 77% of Republican approval. And perhaps most strikingly, about 3/4 of Republicans throughout his presidency at various times, various opinion polls, expressed their belief that Donald Trump was honest and that he spoke the truth most of the time or all the time. And you will note how that differs from the record by fact checkers. And this raises a first, to me, very important question. Why is this accepted? Why do intelligent people with an MBA from Harvard think that Donald Trump is honest? Now, to me, the key here is authenticity. The title of the paper by Hahl et al. Is Authenticity of the Lying Demagogue. And I think it's a terrific paper and a terrific title because it captures what is going on. Donald Trump's dishonesty is not a bug, it's a feature. By being dishonest, he is violating the norms of an establishment. The establishment tells people, don't lie, get educated, tell the truth. These are all elitist norms. If I violate those as a politician, I'm signaling to my followers that I'm really seriously, authentically opposing those elites. I'm with you, the guy in the pickup truck. I know what it's like to change oil in your engine because I'm lying all the time. So there's evidence that if people question the legitimacy of a system or feel left out, then any norm violation signals authenticity. That means denying vaccinations, denying education, denying science, calling the media fake news, being dishonest. All of those are markers of authentic opposition to the elites. And within a populist logic, that is a feature, not a bug. And we can show this in experiments that the conditions under which this is true, this authenticity having replaced accuracy. So I think that is something we have to confront. First of all, to understand why people can consider somebody to be honest who's lying to them all the time. Now, how do these knowledge dementors spread their falsehoods and their shock, chaos, disinformation? Well, this is something that we can talk about for hours. I just very briefly want to sketch out one particular aspect of this, which is micro-targeting of information based on people's inferred characteristics. Now, there's very clear evidence shown in this graph, which I'll explain in just a second, that if you have access to 300 Facebook likes of a person, you can infer that person's personality with greater accuracy than their own spouse. So 300 makes you better than the spouse. Having 60 likes means with a machine and artificial intelligence algorithm, you can do better than a coworker. A friend. 10 likes are sufficient to do better than a work colleague. So the power of big data and machine learning allows us to infer a person's personality from their Facebook like, without that person ever having revealed it or having consented to that personality being inferred. Now, why would that matter? Well, it matters a great deal because there's at least one study that looked at the effectiveness of micro-targeting of ads towards people's personality, in this case, extroversion or introversion. Just to give you an example of the stimuli used in their study, this was cosmetic ads. They were only targeting female participants. And guess what? The one on the left is targeting extroverted people, people who are outgoing and like to party. The ad on the right appeals to introverts, people who tend to stay out of the public limelight and are happy and self-contained by themselves. Now, if you look at the data, what you can see here is that if the audience and the targeted ad matches, people are more persuaded to buy things. So on the left, we have introverted ads. If they're shown to an introverted audience in green, then the introverts buy a lot more stuff than the extroverts do. And the reverse is true if you're showing extroverted ads. So if you match the ads to the audience, bingo, you're selling your lipstick. If you mismatch, you're selling less. These are click-through rates, but other aspects of that experiment is actual sales because they actually sold cosmetics using Facebook ads and found that micro-targeting supported their sales. Now, when it comes to lipsticks or cosmetics, I'm not terribly concerned about what's going on, to be honest. But I do become very concerned about this type of micro-targeting when it comes to political messages. Now, one of the big problems of customized micro-targeted messages that are disseminated on Facebook is that no one other than the target or the person who's sending them out knows that these ads exist or knows what's in them. Now, what that does is to move political debate from a marketplace of ideas to furtive manipulation, because there's no opportunity for rebuttal. Hillary Clinton had no idea what was going on Facebook and what was being said about her, and she could not meet those allegations. And that is, I think, antithetical to democracy. And I did mention briefly yesterday my work for the European Commission. There's a report that we just put out last year. I'm happy to circulate the link later or even send you copies of the report, which outlines in great detail this relationship between technology and democracy and the cognitive pressure points that it creates. So what are we going to do about the Dementors? Well, there are two things I want to tell you about. The first one, Expecto Patronum, in case you don't recall your Harry Potter right now, that's a spell that keeps the opponents at bay. You just keep them at a distance. And I want to illustrate what I mean by that by a study that was just published a few weeks ago, where we're reverse engineering micro-targeting, as I've just described, by boosting users' knowledge about themselves. How do we do that? Well, the experiment that we performed, actually one of several, is extremely simple. We get people into the lab. Of course, it's all done online, so they don't actually walk anywhere, but they click on the link. And the first thing we do in the condition of interest is to give them a questionnaire that establishes their personality. And again, we're using extroversion, introversion. Once we have established their personality, we give them truthful feedback about who they are. We tell them what their personality is. And then we ask them to classify ads and tell us whether they think that they are being targeted by those ads. Now, in a control condition, we do almost the same thing, except we give them a personality scale that's completely irrelevant to the design of the ads. So just to illustrate what I mean by that is people are given their personality test, then they're given an explanation about what an extrovert is or what an introvert is. Now, of course, we tell them a lot more than just this headline here. You know, they get a detailed paragraph that they have to read in depth, so they really understand the concepts of extroversion, introversion. Then they're given personalized feedback. So this is the type of thing they see that a person who's moderately extroverted would see. They get this graph, and it indicates where on that graph this particular person is located. And then they proceed to the next phase of the experiment, where the experimental task is simply for people to say, is this ad targeted at me? Yes or no? That's the only task people have to do. Now, if you look at that, imagine you've just learned something about extroversion, introversion. Do you think that's targeting extrovert or introvert? Well, it's actually targeting an extrovert. It's all about outgoing, going to a party, bring on the night. You know, this is typical extroverted territory. And indeed, after being given personality feedback, people can classify ads as to whether or not they target them with 90% accuracy. In fact, the modal response after being given feedback is 100% correct. The largest number of people in that condition are the ones who get it 100% correct. Without that feedback and without knowledge of their personality, people are still above chance, but not nearly as good as in the other condition. They're only at around 60 to 65%. So there's a boost in performance of about 30 percentage points, which is incredible in terms of magnitude of an effect. Now, the argument here is that that might be the first step to resilience. If you can detect that you're being targeted, maybe you can also then resist the urge to buy cosmetics or to buy a political message or to be persuaded by it. So this approach generally is known as inoculation, and I would offer that as a scalable solution to some of our problems. In fact, right now I'm doing some work with Google and YouTube where we've developed very brief videos that teach people how not to be misled by misleading rhetoric. And we found that to be very effective at scale with about 5,000 participants. So there is something there, I think, that works. Now, finally, I want to briefly also talk about my other spell, Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus is a spell that disarms the opponent. So when it's too late and they've come near you, you couldn't keep them at bay. Well, you still have a chance. You could disarm them. Now, in our context, disarming people is equivalent to debunking misinformation. So can misinformation be debunked? Yes, but no. This is where it gets subtle. Yes, it can be debunked, but no, not fully and not in the way you might want to. Now, to illustrate what I mean by that, and this is a very systematic effect. This is not an isolated finding. This is, in fact, at the heart of the literature on debunking. What we did here in this particular experiment, this was done during the primaries before Trump was elected in 2016. We presented people online with a sample of Trump statements that were true or false. A false statement is Donald Trump saying that vaccines cause autism. And a factual statement, which he did say, he got that right, is that the US spent $2 trillion on the war in Iraq. Now, people gave us belief ratings. We then followed the misinformation by a correction, and the fact was followed by an affirmation. And we then tested them either immediately or a week later on the same statements. Okay, so it's a very simple paradigm. People are shown something that's false, it's corrected. We ask for their belief. Here's what happened. Ignore the panel on the left, that's irrelevant, that's why it's grayed out. And let's look at the panel on the right, and for starters, ignore the color. The solid lines are for facts. The broken lines are myths. At the very beginning on the left, you have belief in facts and misinformation without us telling them anything. And what you can see is that on average, people believe the facts a little more than the misinformation, but not a hell of a lot more. We then introduce our intervention. We tell them the facts are true, the misinformation is wrong, and look what happens. Everybody now believes the facts, and fewer people believe the misinformation. Wow, it works. You can debunk misinformation. Even a week later, people are still doing better than they did at the outset. And now look at the color. The color is about political affiliation. Red is a Republican supporter of Trump, blue a Democrat, purple are the people who no longer exist. They were Republicans who opposed Trump. And what you can see is that you get sort of the same pattern regardless of political affiliation. So where's the polarization? Where's the post-truth in this? Well, the post-truth is in this slide. This is where we ask people about their voting intentions and their feelings towards Donald Trump. On the right, we have feelings. On the left, we have voting intentions. And now look at the only thing that matters. It is their prior attitudes towards Trump. And our intervention had no effect. Before, immediately afterwards, a week later, nothing has changed. The only thing that mattered is how they came into the lab. And if we analyze these data at a more fine-grained level of detail, then we find that there's no association between the degree of belief change in individual claims and a change in voting intentions or feelings. In other words, yes, we can debunk isolated facts. People then say, oh, right, yeah, well, he got that wrong. Okay, I no longer believe that vaccines cause autism. But it has absolutely no bearing on how they feel about Donald Trump. Now, we've replicated this finding also with Bernie Sanders to make it completely politically symmetrical. And we find precisely the same thing. To a first approximation, Sanders supporters and Trump supporters don't differ that much. As a first approximation, there are differences, but the overall pattern isn't that greatly different. And there's an important message in this, and this goes to quite a bit of research that's been published recently that shows that you can debunk people. And indeed, you can. You can debunk misinformation, and people will tell you, I no longer believe this. But that's only half the battle, because what these belief measures do not tell us is whether people will change their underlying attitudes or whether they will rely on that misinformation 5 minutes later in a different context. And there's a plethora of research on misinformation showing that misinformation will stick, even if people say, oh, I no longer believe it. People will say, I don't believe it anymore because you told me it was false. And in the next sentence, they will make use of that information that they just told you they no longer believe. Well, it's still there, and it's still driving what they say. It's driving their voting, and it's driving their feelings about a candidate. At least in the United States, it does. This is, again, culturally very specific and very important, not to overgeneralize. In fact, we have run the exact same study in Australia, which is far less polarized than the United States. And in Australia, if Australian voters find out that a politician lied to them, they no longer want to vote for them. We actually do find an effect there of calling out lies of politicians on voting intention and feelings for a candidate. But in the US, we're in a post-truth world where there's a complete dissociation between how I feel and what the facts are. Okay. And with that, I will welcome your questions just very briefly. I think we have to realize that misinformation matters, that it's different now from the way it used to be. We're no longer supposed to believe something. We're just supposed to be confused and give up on the idea we can believe anything. That's my interpretation of the strategic intent behind post-truth. But we're not defenseless because we have inoculation and we have debunking that can help us at times. And with that, I thank you for your attention. And just in case you're interested, those are the links to a number of handbooks my colleagues and I have published to deal with misinformation, specifically about COVID and conspiracy theories, but also more general. Thank you.